says, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? I want to think about that question. But let's read the whole psalm, if you will. Start at verse 1. In the Lord put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For lo, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold. His eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. When you look at a world full of turmoil, and you look at how Jesus described the people of his day as an adulterous and wicked generation, and you look how Paul described it sometime later, that you shine as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. That's the way it was thought of then. Jesus came into a place of darkness. He was a light in a dark place. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, there are evils in the world. If you ever find yourself disturbed by the things around you and the evils in the world and the violence that takes place, and you look and you say, well, how do I make sense of all of this? When you have a society that does not, first off, acknowledge God, or they reject him and they don't respect him as who he is, they don't love him, they don't realize that God has been so good to us. But then when people reject God, that is the problem. The problem of a people, that's the downfall of any nation. Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Turning away from God is the problem. When you look at the violence that occurred in Genesis 6 and why God decided to bring a flood upon the world and start over. Or you look at the violence at the time of Sodom, and you look at the hatred that was placed upon, and the false accusations even towards Lot, who God called righteous. When you look at how people get upside down about what's right, what's wrong, they call evil good, and they call good evil, and how the world is so mixed up about that. When you look at how people have rejected God's rules and his plans, and they don't respect that his rules are for our good, that's what happens. All of the problems of mankind, if you go right back to the very beginning, the first ill of mankind, the downfall, is a result of sin. So it was a lack of trust in God. God said, don't eat of that tree. Now, whether you understood that or whether she understood that, and whether she was deceived and tricked, it goes back to she should have trusted God more. That some way, somehow, God meant what he said. There was a reason behind it. Whether it makes sense to you or not. Or made sense to her or not. But look at all of the problems, the death that's in the world. That's a result of the sin. They would have had right to the tree of life, but now being out of the garden, they don't. Now the tree of life is in heaven. When she sinned, she separated herself from God. That was the problem. The pain in the childbearing, the sweat in work, the toil, the thorns, the briars, all of the pain, all of the discomfort of this life, all of the problems are a result of sin. It's not a result of God. God is not the one to blame for all of the problems. Now, sometimes people will look at a situation, they'll see events that take place where someone takes it upon their own hands and commits an act of violence, flying planes into a building and killing innocent people, strapping bombs on someone's chest and hurting themselves and others, a mass shooting. Those are acts of violence. Those are a result of someone not believing, trusting in God's design for life. They don't appreciate that God made that life. That life has a soul. That person is made in the image of God. And no one has the right to take something that is God-given like that. That is something so precious. And it does not matter the circumstances of one's personal wants or what they think they ought to have, or that pride and that rejection of God and not appreciating that here is something that God has given to a person. And that person stands or falls before their Maker. And it is not my duty, and it is not my place to punish evildoers. That God's got that handled. And I think a lot of that comes back to this psalm. When he says in verse 3, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? If you find yourself disturbed by all of these evils, what can the righteous do? When you look at home life, when you see that people have rejected God's design of one man with one woman for life, that those children need two parents. Those children need a mother and a father. And those children need that modeled before them. When that is broken down, when the marriage is not viewed the way God designed it and it's broken, problems are going to result. When a man does not love his wife sacrificially, as Jesus did the church, when a wife does not respect her husband's authority, you might think that's archaic. You might think that's outdated. Some people might think that. It's God's design from the beginning that a man would leave his father and his mother, cleave to his wife, they two would be one flesh, and that man would be head over woman. That is God's design from the beginning. When you distrust that and you think that needs to be updated or think that needs to be changed, problems are going to result. When the roles are reversed, problems are going to result. Whenever someone thinks they have a better way, well, let's let the woman be the head of the house and let's let the man submit to the woman. That's reversed. That's a distrust of God's design. Problems will result. Children might be confused. Who's really the man? Who's really the woman? Problems may result to where eventually another generation might arise and they don't even know what those genders are. They don't even know that there's a man and there's a woman and you're one of those. And how God made you, you need to accept that. You don't need to change God's design. You don't need to... It doesn't matter if you want to be someone else. It doesn't matter if you want your role reversed. Stay within the lane that God has given you. If you trusted that, if others trusted that, regardless if someone makes fun of that, if someone is bullied, if someone is belittled, maybe because of the way God made them, and so maybe that insecurity and that hurt and that pain or abuse, if that causes someone to want to be somebody else that God made them, problems will result. But if we trusted in God and we did God's way and realized God's way is best, He's the one that made us, so He gets to decide how things go. Well, if you think about all of these problems, trying to do things our way, look where it's got us. So what can the righteous do? When you look about yourself and you say, wow, the world is so confused. What can I do about this situation? Well, the psalm tells me what I can do. In the very first verse, he says, in the Lord put I my trust. It doesn't matter if others want to intimidate me. It doesn't matter if others want me to shut down, don't say any words, cause me to flee like a bird to a mountain, want to silence me, want to cause me to not speak up for God. If somebody wants to try to prevent me from teaching others in a loving and patient way, if others hate me because I'm trying to follow God's design, well, I can trust God. The last person that I want to try to make the enemy about this whole situation and the world we live in is God. God's not the problem. The problem is because people have left God. That's the problem. So I want to be a part of the solution. I don't want to be a part of the problem. So the solution is for me, and that's the one I can control, is for me to trust in God. Do I realize who God is? In verse 1, when he says, put your trust in the Lord, or I put my trust in the Lord, I've got to stop and think here. God hasn't changed. God is the same loving God. He's the same just God. Whenever there is something that I see in the world that is wrong, when Cain hated his brother and he killed his brother, does that mean that God did wrong? No, God can handle Cain. Who is God? God is a just judge. He knew how to handle Cain. And God did not forget Abel. His blood cried to him from the ground. He acknowledged him. Abel is in God's hands. Cain is in God's hands. So we just need to recognize that. When I see injustices, when I see wrongs, I need to know that God has got this handled. He might not do it on my timetable. I might not understand why he's waiting. I might not understand. But that's where I need to leave it in his court. If I know who he is, do we not know that God hates sin? And I'm pretty sure he hates the violence and the sin and the corruption and all the injustices more than we do. I'm pretty sure about that. And I'm pretty sure that his view about the whole situation is the accurate one. Because there might be other factors here that I might not understand and see, but he knows it. So I need to trust him. That's really what it boils down to. Trust that God will take care of this problem in his timing. And I need to let him. I don't need to be usurping his authority. Vengeance belongs to God. He will repay. And so I need to leave that there. In verse 4, where is God? He's in His holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, His eyelids try the children of men. There's nothing hid before God. Hebrews says that. All things are naked and opened. There's nothing that is like secret before God. He knows everything. He knows everyone's motive. He knows their circumstances. He knows how they were raised. He knows the environment they're in. He knows their circumstances. He knows their why they did what they did. He knows all of that. And He's watching. He saw what Cain did to his brother. He saw what Sodom was doing. He saw the violence at the time of Noah. He sees the violence today. He sees all of that. In Daniel 4, we have a similar point. In Daniel 4, in verse 17, this matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever He will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. We might look at any given generation and we might say, how did this kind of person come into power? There have been wicked kings, even among God's people. There have been wicked rulers. There have been wicked people in authority. There have been people who disregard God and do all kinds of evils. God has known about that, and He's well aware of it. He's watching. He sees. In 2 Chronicles chapter 16, notice what he says here. 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show Himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward Him. We used to sing a song when I was growing up called There's an All-Seeing Eye Watching You. Now some people might think of that as that sounds like a scary thing. Well, it might be, depending on where you stand in that. We do have a God that sees. And so if I'm doing wrong, and if I'm doing wrong in secret, I can't hide that from God. When Adam committed that first sin, and he tried to hide, God knew. There's nowhere we can go. When Jonah shirked his duty, and he went the other way, God found him. Moses said to the people who he was questioning their motive of why they're doing and making some of the choices they did, he said, be sure your sin will find you out. There is nothing that we can hide from God. When Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? Peter knew this. And he said, you know all things. So when God is asking me, do I love Him? And let's say I kind of love Him. But my heart of love is not as fully devoted as it ought to be. He knows that. He knows whenever I'm halfway in and not. He knows whether I care more about what others think of me or than He does. He knows all of that too. There's not a thing that I can do, think, or believe, or have an attitude about that. And so here's what I need to recognize, that God sees everything. And I remember whenever there was this tension between Sarah and her handmaid. And Sarah felt vindicated because she felt wronged that here it was, she gave her handmaid to her husband in order to carry on the family name. Now, I think in that whole situation, I'm not saying everything Sarah did there was right. And I'm not saying everything that Hagar did was right. But you know, God knows all of that too. God knows who is really wronged. And He knows, well, maybe this other one isn't so squeaky clean in this whole thing either. God knows all of that. But you remember when Hagar was cast out. And she went to this well. And there was this well that she named Bir Lahai, which means the God that sees. Well, and I think about that. And I also think about what Sarah said, that she acknowledged that God would judge between me and her. That's what she wanted. Now, just think about that for a moment. Sometimes we think, I'm the right one. I'm doing what's right. This other one is wrong to me. God knows if I am right. God knows if I'm right on this but wrong on that. And so He knows all of that. And what can we do? Well, we can be right. And we can know that if we are innocent and someone else is wronging us, or others around us are trying to harm us, and we're concerned about that, then know that God sees all that. And verse 4 of Psalm 11 says He tries the righteous. So if I'm trying to live right before God, and I'm just trying to do the very best that I can do, God knows that. And if I am being wronged, God sees that too. Now, what God might do with me, He might allow this thing to teach me. He might allow this thing to humble me, to chastise me. He might allow this thing to cause me to trust Him more, put it more in His hands. He might allow me to shape my heart and to shape my character. To not be bitter about other people. And not allow others to take my peace away from me. I might go through some kind of a test about that. In 1 Peter chapter 1, there's always going to be tests. And there's going to be these tests of faith to see what we're made of. To see who we really trust. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 6, wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen ye love, in whom though now ye see Him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. That trial might be like a crucible, like a fire that separates the impurities of a metal, but might make me better if I let it. If I stay true to God, what can the righteous do? The righteous can continue to trust in God and let the trial mold me and make me better. Make me rely more on God. Now going back to Psalm 11, if I am truly trusting in God and I know that He tries the righteous, verse 5 and 6 gives me some comfort here too. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Upon the wicked He shall rain snares, fire, and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. I need to recognize that when I am disturbed by evils in the world, and that bothers me, I need to know God hates the sin as well. I need to know that. He hates wickedness. He's the one that's been wronged. Because whenever evils are committed, someone has forsaken God. And so I need to know that God hates that wickedness. And He loves righteousness. That's the other part, verse 7. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. If, and this is the if, we find ourselves being mistreated and we're innocent, He knows that. And if someone else is harming us, He knows that. We need to let Him handle that part. We need to deal with our part. And our part is, what can the righteous do? We can trust in God. We can know His character. Believe in who He is. Believe in His power. Believe in His control. Believe in His justice. But maybe also believe that if He can influence the situation, He has that ability. But if He chooses not to, then I need to know that His motive and whatever He decides to do on His part is always right. We sing a song, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, He amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing." In the middle of a world full of wickedness, God is our refuge. He's the one that we can rely on. He's the one that we can feel safety from. What can the righteous do? Trust in God. Pray to Him. If you do trust in Him. You know, if you are disturbed about things that have occurred and that bothers you, pray to God about it. Express those feelings that you have to Him, and God can hear that. God is near to the brokenhearted. There are times when you have righteous people who were disturbed and unhappy and sad over evils that occurred in the world. Being sad in and of itself and being bothered by evil in the world is not a fault. When Nehemiah was a cupbearer, it showed on his face how he felt about the condition of his people when he was disturbed. And the ruler said, "Why is your face sad?" It's like he could tell. And his response was, "How can I not be when I look at the condition of my people?" So in that case, it was not wrong for him to feel the way he felt. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He was crying. He was very much upset because of the situation around him. I don't think that was a fault. He actually made the statement, "Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by?" Why isn't other people as disturbed? Sometimes we need to be disturbed. Now we need to be disturbed about the right things. There's sometimes we get disturbed about the wrong things. And we're bothered about things that don't matter. We're bothered about things that are such tiny little matters. We make a much ado about nothing sometimes, making a mountain out of a molehill. Don't do that. But when there is a proper time, there are times we need to be disturbed. And if you are, pray to God about that. Tell God. A lot of the Psalms are very honest about how they were feeling towards God about some of these things. And sometimes we have difficulty with some of their statements because we think, well, is that a right attitude here? But it's true. But we can pray. And we can be righteous. Well, what can the righteous do? The righteous can be what they're supposed to be. regardless of what other people... What I do before God should not depend upon what other people do to me. My love for God should not change just because other people might reject God. My love for you should not change depending upon how you treat me. That's not my business. It's really not my business to figure out and make you treat me the way I want to be treated. I'm glad you do treat me when I say you. But you get the point what I'm trying to say. If somebody else were to mistreat me, that makes no difference how I'm supposed to treat them. None. I'm supposed to love them regardless. Love my enemies. Love those who hate me. Love those who curse me. Those who despitefully use me and persecute me. Those are the ones I'm supposed to love, not just the ones who are making me feel great. Anybody can do that. Whenever there's someone who really cares about you and they are treating you, anybody can do that. But what makes you one of God's children and separates you from the unrighteous of the world is that you love others regardless. Be righteous. When Noah, in Genesis 7, when there was all that wickedness in the world, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You want to know why? Because he did what was right. He followed God. If wickedness increases around you, you can be righteous. You can be right before God. You can be a light in a dark place, as Jesus was. Don't be of the world. Be the salt of the earth. Be the light of the world. If evil men and seducers wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived, well, then you need to be what God wants you to be. And you need to be a part of a kingdom that has a sure foundation. If the foundations be destroyed, if it looks like all the things in which society around you should be built upon, right from wrong, trusting in God and all of that, if that seems like it's crumbling all around you, what you can do is you can trust in God, you can pray to Him, and you can be righteous yourself. Appreciate your attention.